Hello, everyone, and welcome to the SASA Save Ancient Studies Alliance Birthday Bash. We are kicking off with a panel discussion on the future of the past. It's going to be a very exciting discussion. Thank you so much for joining us. What is SASA? The Save Ancient Studies Alliance works to promote the study of the ancient world and engagement with our human deeper pasts, building grassroots movement through outreach, collaboration, accessibility, and public scholarship. We work towards our goal of inspiring a wide, inclusive community of scholars, learners, and students. You can find us all over the place on the internet. We have our own webpage, of course, but we also have social media. We do have Facebook, Instagram. We're actually no longer on Twitter, but on Blue Sky. We have our YouTube channel, of course, and also Twitch. So do come and find us. We've got a TikTok. We've got an Instagram. We are making it go. This is a live event that is open to the public, so we do ask that you follow a few central rules. Be kind and respectful. Listen and ask thoughtful questions throughout the event. Please be patient with the technology and those administering it. That would be me, so I'd appreciate it. SASA live events are streamed live on Twitch, YouTube, and Facebook, and also some of our partner channels. And SASA live events are recorded and archived, so these recordings will be posted on the above platforms, on our platforms after the event, so just make a note of that. And of course, the most important rule is to have fun. Right now, we are in the Birthday Bash, which is our big fundraiser. We have the SASA Triathlon going on, which is a donations race. So those of us who are participating are SASA members trying to get the most donations before the end of the Birthday Bash. So if you can donate any amount, you can go to our triathlon page and put in your donation for your chosen racer. And the person who you vote for might win a prize. Whoever gets the most the most number of donors by the end of the month will win. Also, you will be signed up for the Birthday Bash donor appreciation events. If you donate $5 or more, there's going to be a donor appreciation event for you. And if you donate a whole lot, well, there might be something special. So please do check out our Birthday Bash donation page. You can support us. Follow that QR code to our donations. You are also invited to become a recurring SASA donor. If you enjoy our live events, such as our Keo gaming, book clubs, reading groups, this kind of panel, please consider becoming a supporter of SASA with a recurring monthly donation. For as little as $3 a month, you can help us to save ancient studies. Go to saveancientstudies.org/birthdaybash to learn more. There are rewards at various backer levels, so please do feel free to join us for that. Thank you so much for joining us. Please do visit our website and the Birthday Bash page. We'd love to have you. There are more events going on all the way until the 15th. So there's going to be quite a lot to enjoy. And with that out of the way, I'd like to welcome our panelists. First, I'll introduce myself. My name is Julie Levy. I am the Save Ancient Studies Alliance's managing director and the head of our virtual conference. And I have a background in ancient Greek and Roman studies. These folks you see coming online here are our lovely panelists. I'll be asking questions for them to answer, and we'll get into some good discussion. So let me begin by introducing them. We have Howard Williams, professor of archaeology at the University of Chester. On our social medias, he is listed as ArchaeoDef. There is Irina Maria Manea, a medievalist specializing in Norse studies, a public historian, and a YouTuber going by Shield of Skuld. Next is Manolis Pankolos, an ancient historian specializing in reception and memory studies in the Hellenistic and Roman periods. He's the founder of Isagoria Publishing, CIC, and an associate professor in the humanities at Zhejiang ANF University in the PRC. Mariam Fauzi is a master's student at in the Faculty of Archaeology, Cairo University, specializing in restoration techniques of archaeological buildings with a focus on structural analysis within heritage building and modeling. And Marcella Ward is a lecturer in classical studies at the Open University, UK, co-editor of Critical Ancient World Studies, The Case for Forgetting Classics, interested in the reimagining relation with antiquity, sometimes called classical reception. So I would like, oh, I missed a part of that. I'm so sorry. So that is more able to offer emancipatory narratives and a new history of the world that undermines our current unjust colonial world order. Thank you, Chella, for bringing that up. All right. So now that I have introduced everybody, I would like to welcome you all to start talking on our subject of the future of the past. I think our first sort of biggest central question here is, given the shifting political winds right now, and given the way that many countries have devalued the practice of history and the seeking of our true past, how do historians effectively advocate for history's relevance? And especially under the prevalence of the narrative that STEM is all that matters.
A stunned silence.
I know it's a big topic. Who wants to begin? Are you volunteering, Howard?
Okay. It's a tough one, isn't it? Your introductory notes just left me feeling absolutely terrified and daunted. I'm thinking of, I think you should be, because these are tough questions we need to be addressing. And I feel I should have some beginnings of an answer, but I don't. It's really daunting given what we're seeing in our individual countries and our global scene, and the lack of trust in academics, the erosion of resources, the deliberate curtailment of funding that we're seeing in many nations, some of which is not a surprise, some of which is perhaps disturbing, even if we saw it coming. And I think we're going to see increasingly, sadly, a lot of voices being silenced, people who aren't able to join programs to learn about the past, who are funding is being ripped out of doctoral researchers halfway through their programs. It's difficult to find any hope or any constructive solution. So all I can say is be loud and as annoying as we dare, and to be lending our voices to a collective efforts is I think all we can do, and challenging that very narrative that we can do without the humanities and with history and archaeology in all its forms. I'm sorry, that's just a really lame opening, but I just thought I'd say something to get people to disagree with me or add more concrete suggestions.
Well, I think maybe if I can just sort of jump off the back of that, Howard, I think you're absolutely right, in that fairly dismal assessment of where we are in the world in terms of being historians trying to do this thing that we call history. But I think on the underside of that horror is actually something really quite interesting. Because, when I saw that list of words that Donald Trump was going to ban, from federal websites and this kinds of things, and when I saw that it included the word historically, right? If you look at that list, it includes all the words you'd want to include if you wanted to roll back decades and decades of progress on DEI issues, on social justice issues, right? It includes things like race, it includes things like discrimination, ideology, those sorts of words. But it also includes the word historically. So I think you have to ask the question, what is it about history that is so frightening to someone like Donald Trump? And I think we should be very wary also of thinking that this is only a Donald Trump problem or only a kind of right now problem, because, we have seen over the last number of years, as you said, Howard, we've seen defunding, underfunding of history departments, of history projects. But we've also seen, I think, and people might disagree with me, but my huge issue at the moment is that I think history has failed to reckon with the current moment in which we're in. I think if you look at, for instance, the genocide against the Palestinians, and you look at the way that that is also a historicide, by which I mean it involves deliberate destruction of historical sites, it involves deliberate destruction of archives, of libraries, of schools, of universities. There is not a single university still standing in Gaza because of a deliberate destruction of, learning, of history, of all those kinds of things. And I think we have to ask the question, why? What is at stake in the destruction of history? Because I think within that question, why are all of these, everyone on the far right, all of these Islamophobes, all of these occupying powers, all this kind of neo-colonial structure in which we live, why does it rely so strongly on the control of history? And in the case of Palestine, I think it's very clear. I think it's that if you look at the archaeology of Palestine, you look at the history, the archives of Palestine, what you see is that Palestine has always been a multicultural, multi-religious, multi-ethnic place. So what you can't do is have history of Palestine and also impose a colonial ethno-state on Palestine. It won't work. So if you want to impose a colonial ethno-state, you have to destroy its history. And I think if we carry that logic through, I'm very interested at the moment in thinking about how Palestine is actually teaching us about this whole colonial world order in which we live, right? It's not just something that's local or geospecific. And I think if you play that out, if you use Palestine to think about Donald Trump and his attacks on history, or even just to think about, the kind of rolling back on the decolonial agenda in the neoliberal university in the West, for instance, that, we're watching happen now under our very eyes. If you use Palestine to think about that, I think where you get to is that we are, when I say we, I don't mean us here, but people are worried about the notion of history, because history was getting us to a point where maybe it might have been possible to overthrow that neo-colonial world order, or at least to think differently, to organize the past differently, in such a way as to denaturalize the world order, the colonial world order in which we live. So I think, yes, on the one hand, Howard, I completely agree with you, the situation is dismal. On the other hand, I think precisely because it's so dismal, we're also seeing precisely what history can do. And that, that liberatory, emancipatory thing that history can do that everyone's frightened of, that's what we have to go out there and fight for, I think.
Just to add my own 2 cents on top of that, I think you make a wonderful point, Chela, and autocrats across history. Also, we have some chats talking about this. Autocrats across history, fascists across history have always tried to destroy the past, because the past is never clean and simple like their narratives. The past is full of real people, real diversity, and real freedoms that any autocratic, any regime of that nature is going to want to erase. And so we see the same kind of thing in ancient China, when a dynasty wanted to erase the previous one. We see the same kind of thing in World War II, when they burned all of the books that didn't fit their narrative in Germany. We see that same destruction of history. And so the very fact that history is one of the first things they go after tells us that history is powerful. And I wonder if any of you want to speak to how you feel that is, where we can go with it.
Can I just add, and then I'll be quiet?
Absolutely.
I feel like I've spoken a lot. But, I began just then by saying that I think history has failed us. And I think it's important that we don't allow ourselves to think that there's only autocrats that aren't doing good enough history, or that there's only far-right leaders who have a problem with history, or I think we could very easily get into a kind of polarized view where we think there are bad people who hate history, and then there are good people who love history. Because I think we are also living in a world where historians are not doing a good enough job of telling emancipatory stories about history. You watch, for instance, what happened at the American Historical Association, where we had the motion about condemning the genocide of the Palestinians that had wide support that was then vetoed, by a leadership. So we're also in a situation where I think historians need to be doing better history. And what I mean by that is I don't mean they need to be doing better positivist history. They need to be looking at more documents or something. I mean, we need to be really thinking about the role of history in the modern world, I think, and formulating that emancipatory vision of history. So yeah, I don't want us to just spear the autocrats, although let's do that too.
Like they need to raise the awareness of the community more. They need to engage the community in the decision making and the problem. Like we do have something very similar going on in Egypt. They wanted to build a bridge to make the transportation easier. However, the bridge was over a historical site. Sadly, that site was not documented in the Ministry of Tourism. So they just starting demolishing it. The site was at least like 300 years ago, and it's cemetery. So to build a new structure, to build a new bridge, they decided, okay, it's not used. It does not give us any fun. Let's demolish it and go on. So in my opinion, what we can do is just talk about it, raise the awareness, open public lectures, try to engage the community of the site about the problem. So to put some pressure on the government to stop the demolishing process, to stop what is going on, even though this case is not in war. It's like a case, like you can just try to find another solution. It's not the mainly only available solution for you to build a bridge on that side.
Yeah, I also think it's very important to underscore the idea that history has the power to make us better citizens of the global community, because regardless of the age we're studying or of the particular dimension of history, we always study like structures of power, wealth distribution, social networks, social movements, the search for spirituality. So essentially human nature, right? And I think it's very important to also underscore the foundational skills relevant in multiple areas, because, well, history, unfortunately, especially ancient and medieval history, I would add here, history has fallen prey to neoliberal capitalism as well. I mean, we have this idea of sciences offering immediate quantifiable results. That is not possible when studying history, but the win is long-term. And I think that needs to be underscored, because we can develop a well-rounded thinking. We develop skills to navigate the complexities of both the past and the present without being reduced to just consumers of, I don't know, monuments or popular culture. And I think all fields are involved in this, because all fields have a history, right? So we need to look at this in the context of their development. So in this sense, I think history has the power to help us get a better grasp of evolutions in multiple fields, and not just in the field of history itself.
This is, if I may join in the conversation, this is not the first time that we have discussed with colleagues and today the same topic, and it is history. It's the humanities in general. Is not that particular ancient studies that we all deal with, and we have made already some points like history is very important, and that's why people want to control it or to change it and so on. And then, of course, what Mariam said earlier, we need civic engagement, and we need people to speak more, collaborate more, and so on. And I always think that a lot of it returns in who has access to that history. So yes, departments are closing down, okay, and maybe they will be reduced, especially in the global north, even more. But the people that need access to the humanities and to history will always have it, because these are the people who are controlling the governments and they are actively participating in them. So it is like a return to an earlier version, maybe like the 18th century, in which people who have access and funds can study history, can become politicians, deal with the things, and the rest of the people will kind of lose this point, because actually it's a matter of places. If I can add my perspective, personal, in this, one of the reasons that I am now in China is exactly this. A lot of things are going wrong in the global north, and if China belongs to the global south, it seems that there is the last, I would say, 5 years for sure, revitalization of the humanities. I'm not saying that this comes without attachment and strings or whatever, but there is an actual event going on with new institutes being built, departments getting larger, collaborations, foreign speakers and teachers moving into teaching positions, so on, which may have something to do with the idea that civilization and understanding is grounded for collaboration. And I say that with some personal experience the last 2 years here in China.
I want to pick up on something that I'm starting to hear as a thread through all of your responses, that that there's more we can do as historians to engage people outside of the university, to break that narrative that STEM is all that matters to the working people, as it were. Does anybody want to speak to, what can we be doing better? How should we approach this as historians, this moment?
I think maybe while people get their thoughts together, I can just jump off. But I think the way I formulate this in my head is we need the historians on the picket lines. We need the historians out on the protests. We need the historians. We are in a moment where enormous amounts of learning are happening in collective social gatherings, that are organized around ideas of the left. So whether it's workers' strikes, whether it's, the pro-Palestine struggle, those protests, whether it's protests for, the liberation of the Uyghurs, or, whatever it is, there is this kind of huge social movement at the moment. And I think we need historians to be part of those movements. And I think where history as a discipline is letting us down at the moment is when historians are saying things like history should be apolitical, so I'm not going to get involved in, contemporary movements, contemporary politics, the world in which we live. So there's this idea that history can exist in some kind of ivory tower outside of the political, which to my mind is just a wholly foolish idea. I mean, nothing can be outside of the political, but it also, even if it were not a foolish idea, that wouldn't be a kind of history that I would want, because I think it would be extraordinarily difficult to go out into the world and make the case that history matters if I also had to say, as these apolitical historians apparently have to say, that, history does not have purchase on the world in which we live, which is in the end what political means, right? Involved in a contestation about what sort of a world we live in. And I think history should be at the center of that contestation. So, I take a lot of anger from historians who very loudly and often in very offensive language will say to me that I'm politicizing history and history should be apolitical. I think that's the wrong way around. I think if you want to make the case for the utility of history in the world, you have to accept that history absolutely is involved in the struggles in which we're involved in the present day.
I mean, picking up on that, I think it's really important to go back to what Irina was saying regarding we make our case for our shared disciplines, however we frame them, me as an archaeologist, historians, ancient historians, whatever term you want to use, the importance of studying the past, not simply in terms of a reduction to a positivist neutral stance as we've heard, but in terms of the equipment it gives, the skills it gives, the perspectives and the critical analysis it brings that you simply won't get in STEM, that you simply won't get from any other discipline. And you see this in every historical or archaeological article, every discussion on social media. We're not there to just produce archaeologists have found exciting new thing that is shiny. Oh, look, isn't it interesting? You can find a copy of it on my Etsy store and shit like that. We need to be thinking about how we are equipping people with actual information that they can think about, that can challenge, to make them feel uncomfortable. I had someone on my TikTok feeds today say, "Oh, I really like your videos, Professor Williams, but you're always so negative." And I said, "Why do you think I'm negative?" And the reason some people think it's negative is because I'm making them think, I'm making them uncomfortable. And that is one of the ways we can do it. We can do the directly political activism stuff, and we can also just make people feel really uncomfortable about the foundations of what they thought they knew about how the world was, how the world is, and how the world could be. And I think that's one of the ways in which we engage, as Irina and Chela were saying, with these uncomfortable questions. We can be subversive on a whole range of ways to challenge people's thinking. And as Mariam was saying, linked to local communities, because the more we can connect to people outside the academy in direct and indirect ways to get them involved. If there's a new road scheme that archaeologists are actually supporting and involved with, we don't always have to speak with the same voice. We can actually go on the other side and start campaigning with local people against that road scheme. We don't have to sit in comfortable agreement as an academy, and we don't have to sit in comfortable agreement with state actors. We can do it, not sometimes on the picket lines, sometimes at the protests, but also in the information we share and how we tell our stories.
I just wanted to circle back to something that that both you and Irina have mentioned, is this positivist view of history. Somebody be willing to sort of unpack that term for the audience?
Yeah, I was guilty of using it, so I'm happy to say what I think it means. Yeah, so I think, you know, there is I was about to say an older view of history, but unfortunately I think it still holds sway, which is, you know, the kind of what's sometimes called a view from nowhere. The idea that you can somehow isolate yourself from everything about you, your present moment, the politics of the present moment, your own history, all of those things, and you can look into the past with no filter whatsoever and see in a neutral way what is true and what is false. And that, I think, is positivism, this idea that we can excavate the past exactly as it was. And I always talk slightly carefully about positivism. I talk about, you know, we need to be suspicious of positivism, because very often positivism has been shorthand for the idea that certain historians were neutral. That's to say, usually historically white male historians were neutral, and other kinds of historians of women's history, for instance, you know, racialized historians, Muslim historians, you know, were seen very much as kind of not neutral and producing some kind of politicized narrative, when of course both of those narratives were always politicized. So I think on the one hand, you know, we don't want to give up the ability to debunk nonsense history. We are living in a world where there is enormous amounts of nonsense history circulating all the time. And it has to be the job of the historian to be able to talk about evidence. But what that doesn't mean is a kind of naive positivism of saying, oh, well, I just look at the evidence and it tells me about the ancient world exactly as it was, because no body of evidence does that. So positivism is that desire, I think, or that search for a kind of neutral access to something as it really was, rather than understanding that we create history at the same time as we try to learn about it.
Yeah, I think it's also a form of idealism, this whole idea that you have access to raw data, and that data automatically tells you something. It tells you a story about the past, and that story is really set into stone, and you just have to follow it. And it's the ignorance of the fact that we have so many perspectives and so many interpretations from so many angles and related to so many sources and multiple layers and series of moments and so on and so forth, that we forget that we're dealing with narratives about history, as a matter of fact, and not with history itself. So that's something I think we can blame Ranke for. In the 18th century, I think we're left a little bit with that. I've seen it a lot in popular culture as well. So comments, send me on YouTube.
So just to push a little on that. So who exactly are you blaming this on? Just speak
The
a little more
German
about.
historian Ranke, yeah. He
Yeah.
was the one who believed that classical statues, for example, were white. So that kind of thought.
Which, as historians have known for a long time and have been able to
Yeah.
show in many ways, marble statues were largely painted in vibrant colors, sometimes things we'd even call garish.
Yeah,
So,
same with Rose, yeah.
So just to put the post-positivist spin then on this conversation about statues, I think the post-positivist question, that's to say the question that isn't so interested in positivism, is not so much were they or were they not white. Of course, we know that they weren't, but the kind of post-positivist question that would interest me there would be who wants them to be white? And why? and why do they want them to be white? What sort of an image of the past are you trying to portray when you try to set up this white ancient world? And you know, that ties in with, this is not just a Greeks and Romans thing, right? I've heard Howard many times on TikTok talking about, you know, this idea of white Europe, white indigeneity, all these kind of manufactured white supremacist ideas. And what's happening there when someone says, well, when someone tries to imagine the Greeks as entirely, you know, ancient white people of ancient white Europe, what's happening there is white supremacy is taking this idea of history and is trying to spin it for its own gain. So for me, the interesting question is not so much were they or were they not really white, you know, which is always going to be a reductive kind of question, because you'd have to ask the question, well, what is whiteness? Is whiteness something transhistorical, or is it something that's different in different societies? But yeah, the interesting question is who wants them to be white and why do they want that?
Yeah, I agree. It's very much about the narrative that you're using history to tell. And you know, as Howard was saying earlier, it makes people uncomfortable to interrogate the simplified narratives that they've been learning, and that is something that I think we as historians do in fact have to wrestle with and reckon with as a part of our job in this climate. So yeah, Manolis, please.
If I can interject again, the question, because we're getting again, it's kind of a spiral conversation always. It's like who gets to be a historian? I mean, the problems that we're discussing about the future of the past is problems that we also need to kind of self-reflect on as people who work in academia or in the fringes of academia or transcending those spheres, and we haven't solved them. I mean, whatsoever. And it is really, I mean, it is normally bubbles, academic bubbles that they do not communicate. Okay, people who read a specific language over the others, people who do not want to read others because they think their research is better than others. Okay, and goes on and on and on. And there are multiple discussions we can do about language barriers and about access and all this, but we still lack really collaborations that go deeply. And I say it in a good way. I mean, it's nice to have a discussion about classics in Africa, but this discussion should not be part of Oxford or Cambridge event in a good way. It can be an event of Saving the Ancient Studies Alliance. So civic engagement means also opening up, going to grassroots movements, collaborating with voices that are not very often heard, okay? Trying to change your perspective for other people's perspective, and so on. So we really need to self-reflect. What have we done internally in order to help externally the disciplines work?
Yeah, Manolis, you're bringing us right to what I think is a really the heart of this entire question, which is, you know, we have such an interconnected world now with our ability to collaborate across time and space and language barrier. So how do we actually move past this point of, can see so much of the white Western world, the global North, however you want to frame it, the imperial core, viewing the world as Eurocentric, as white, as Chela was saying. How do we get to the future of the past where we can see the world as interconnected and diverse in all of its time?
Actually, I would love to add something.
Yeah, please.
We talked about the topic of the access, the access of information. Nowadays, even though like the world became a small village, however, still technological development and a lot of paper that even if it's supposedly to be accessed online, it does have some sort of class aspect. I mean by that, I'm gonna tell my own story. Actually, I'm a conservator, and my work mainly focus about the documentation of historical structure in Egypt. So when I first started to let's start master and let's start working on my thesis and so on, I started to read what other people wrote, what the technological development have reached nowadays. In the case of documenting archaeological sites, they use new technology like photogrammetry equipped with the 3D laser scanner, and they equipped both technological in order to give the best result, the best documentation of any type of artifact. In my scenario, and in my faculty, I couldn't find a laser scanner, which was not available. So I was like, should I try to contact someone? But the contact, even I tried for whole year, I tried to contact several institutions, but it will take me at least 2 years to complete that sort of collaboration on my own, since I'm an individual after all. I'm not an organization talking. So I just stuck with using photogrammetry by using photos to create the model, the 3D model of the building. Even though it gives a great potential, but after all, it's not as good. It does not give great results as using other technology that is already available around the world. That showcased how the financial divide between the institution and the research, and who have the accessibility to the cutting edge technology, and those who can't. And sadly, this problem, it's a great, not just for my case, but all of the research, investigation, and analysis work on any artifact, especially not in Middle East, in Middle East countries, where small projects, they often left without the necessary tool, the unnecessary tools or unnecessary support.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of unequal access across the globe. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Yeah. Please continue.
No, that's fine. Okay, that's fine.
Can I add something on the question of how do we get to the future of the past? Because I agree with Manolis about this idea of collaboration, and that we don't actually know how to speak to each other as historians, people who deal with the past. But I think for me, it's not just an interpersonal thing that we don't know how to speak to each other. I think we have to look at the past of the past before we can start to think about the future of the past. Because if you think about, why is it, for instance, that someone like me is called a lecturer in classical studies, whereas someone who studies ancient Africa, or someone who studies ancient China, or someone who studies ancient India, for instance, wouldn't sit in classical studies, because even though classical studies is increasingly trying to think more globally and all those kinds of things, like medieval studies, it's had a kind of global turn, but it hasn't substantially changed what the vast majority of people do when they do classical studies. And that's a question of training. We train them in Latin and Greek. And so the Greeks and the Romans, are at the center of everything they do. But I think we have to kind of get over the idea that it's individuals or that this is a problem of individual people. I actually think this is a structural problem. And I think and that's what I mean when I say we need to look at the past of the past. We need to think about the fact that the way that these disciplines are organized is a colonial way of organizing disciplines, right? These disciplines don't come about by magic. It's not kind of magic that they are the way they are. They look that way because they were organized in a colonial moment. They were then exported around the world under European colonialism. And that's why Eurocentrism isn't just a problem for Europe and the West, right? It's also something that Britain, for instance, went and exported across the Caribbean into India. And when I say exported, I don't mean that as a good thing, because it was also kind of epistemicidal in the sense that all of the other ways of organizing history that may have existed pre-colonization were obliterated. And so we're now sort of stuck with this Eurocentric colonial monolith that gives us this structure for history. And I think it is not at all a helpful structure. It's not helpful for thinking about a global world. It's not helpful, as Mariam says, for looking at the inequalities within the world and, trying to bridge those kinds of divides, because it was never set up to do that. It was set up to be Western supremacist. It was set up in a world where Europe, was convinced and was building a world where Europe was better than anything else. So I think we have to, if we want to have a better future, we have to look at the past of the past. We have to stop thinking that these disciplines come about in some kind of natural way and think about them as constructs of colonialism. And I think only when we do that really kind of deep decolonial thinking. And when I say decolonial, I don't mean, let's add some scholars of color to the reading list. I mean, let's really seriously think about the coloniality that runs through every single thing we do when we're doing history. And after that, I don't think there's an easy solution to the future of the past. My own view is that we need a new history of the world, that the history of the world that we've got has been formulated, as I've said, so as to support the present colonial world order in which we live with all of its injustices and inequalities. I think that a new history of the world would be extraordinarily powerful, but it would need us to deconstruct so much of the coloniality of the way that our disciplines are set up to enable that kind of collaboration that Manolis is talking about, and also to enable us to think much more expansively outside of the way that coloniality structures what we can think. So it's a big project, I think.
I mean, again, a personal perspective, I find it very liberating by changing country to work in academia, that my title now, the official title is Associate Professor in the Humanities. And I am an ancient historian. Studying this allowed me also to think, although I already was thinking about many of these things, allowed me to work and integrate in things that I have never imagined. So discussion about intangible cultural history, different perspectives, things that in some way, exactly because, as you said, they're part of a colonial structure and thinking, never happen in Europe, for my experience, because we are, again, in specific structures and specific bubbles, and we should remain there, and so on. So for me, it was very liberating to set the official title of classicist, because it comes with class, and it is really damaging.
Yes, please, Howard.
May I disagree with Manolis in one sense? Of course, I totally respect their perspective and their experience of that cross-disciplinary framework, allowing more freedom to think, to collaborate, and I accept that. But I also see this language of decolonization and the language of interdisciplinarity of cross-humanities research in the UK being used quite barefacedly as a stick with which to hammer our disciplines into non-existence. So it's not, I don't deny the importance of disciplinary, of breaking down these labels, of breaking down these structures that we've inherited. I've tried to enact as best as possible in my own work and in my collaborations, at least some of that. But I also see universities are clever. They're neoliberal institutions, and they will use every bit of this language to find an excuse to make people redundant, to shut courses, to pull out funding, to funnel funding into things that allow certain disciplines to thrive and others to wither. And so we have to, I'm a bit, perhaps I'm just being pessimistic this evening, but I do feel that this very language that we are supposed to embrace and engage, and this is the rhetoric of the UK system all the time, is supposed to constantly embrace change, embrace interdisciplinarity, and this is and cross humanities collaborations, and that means usually, in my experience, that means we can have 3 people doing the work of 9 because we don't need the disciplines of and therefore we can do it. So yes, I love the idea of working that way, and I agree that that's a noble goal, but I see often that language being used to say, oh, we don't want to, there's no interest in this area now because it's not decolonial enough, so we can shut down and lose those lecturers. And so that's why I'm very, very worried about how, not that I agree with the point, I just worry about how it's manipulated by bad faith organizations and actors.
Yeah, no, you are on the spot, really. Yeah, you nail it. I spent some time in the UK doing my PhD, and I know the language, and I know the context and the framework, and a lot of it is ticks. It's just reducing in. Is it the box ticked? Yes. Yeah. Okay, we can go on, or we cannot go on, and this means nothing actually because we know. I mean, some of it we cannot. It is the same problem as I think everywhere. I was in the Netherlands, now I'm in China. Similar aspects about what is doable and not are there, and bureaucracy is there and things like that. But I say again, the language is very important, but it is not the understanding that we care, it's the use. Because when we hear interdisciplinarity, we understand a different thing from the administrators. Okay, we understand what we mean and what we want to do, but the administrators do not really care about our meaning. It's another plausible explanation of the same meaning. So yeah, I mean, 100% with that. But I think again, it's a problem of us not doing something.
Yeah.
Like, how do we fight the system if the system is the problem?
And I do want to come back to that idea of the university is a neoliberal institution, and it is something that we have to contemplate. And that kind of systematic issue will always co-opt any progress to make a stick out of, as Howard was saying. So there's not really any language or any particular slogan that will be, the perfect ideal to move us forward, unfortunately. But
can I come back on that quickly, Julie, and say yes, absolutely, which is why, as always, as with all extremist appropriations, but also with our universities and our institutions, our governments, we've got to stay nimble in our terminology and not fixate over the language beyond the aspirations. As Manolis's point, I think that's what Manolis's point is. Well, at least that's my takeaway. That it's not sticking with the rhetoric of our particular theoretical frameworks, because they'll always be used against us in 5 years. But staying ahead, staying on focus with what we're trying to achieve with our research and sharing it as best we can.
Absolutely.
I think it's also about being part of those solutions rather than just coming up with the problems, because we're very, very good as academics, I think, at doing, we've all done our deconstruction. We can all do the Foucault thing of deconstructing everything, but I think what we have been less good at is trying to think, well, how do we imagine something different? Because I totally agree that if we allow the decolonial to just be about deconstructing everything and doing nothing else, then we're going to get stuck with that language being appropriated. And when I say that language appropriated, I think it's important to think about the fact that actually it was always already appropriated, right? Everyone, I'm sure, remembers that moment after the racist murder of George Floyd, when every university in the world seemingly wanted to do decolonization and wanted to have this reckoning with racism. And it was frightening, because you kind of had these colonial institutions suddenly saying, well, we're now going to lead the charge of decolonization. And you sort of thought, well, hold on a minute. How can that actually be real? How can a colonial institution suddenly, from one day to the next, become seriously committed to decolonization? So I think a lot of us, for completely understandable reasons, wanted to be on that bandwagon. We wanted to believe that these colonial institutions really were about to decolonize themselves. But of course they weren't. Of course, what they were going to do was reappropriate that language in order to change precisely nothing about the material structures of what they were doing, except to save a bit of money, which is, what they've always been trying to do. So I think we have to lead the charge, not just of doing the deconstructing, but also of saying, okay, how do we imagine this differently? And it's difficult to do that because we're all trained also by these disciplines. So it's going to take, I think, self-reflection, but also trying to imagine beyond those intellectual confines. I think imagination should be much more a part of what historians do.
Yes, we need to, as it were, be on that picket line. We are down to our last 10 minutes, and so I do want to make sure that everybody has a chance to get a word in here. We could definitely talk about this for hours. So I think I want to go around and have everybody talk about something that they think we can do to move forward from this moment as people working in the humanities, as people interested in history, and people interested in our local and wider communities. What do you think we can do right now?
I think at least we could provide a free open lectures to the society. Do even for the younger generation, even for kids, we build them from now to later. So in my opinion, each one of us at least should work with what we have in our hand now. Provide the open seminars or lectures, workshops, etc. In our own society. And later on, we can think about the big picture. We can think about fixing the system or whatsoever. But now, I think each one of us should really think about what can you do in your own community, even if in your own house, with your own, whether children, whether the children of the family. Try to get them into history, to try to deepen their understanding. Tell them about the importance of the cultural heritage, etc.
Howard, I'm really looking forward to your answer.
Okay. I'll give it a go.
You're our pessimist for the panel.
I would say that for every I don't know, let me picture it this way. For every time, and I'm thinking of scholars here, so I don't know if this is the way you want it answered. For every PhD student or master student or early career student, for every one thing you do to try and fit into the system, say another peer-reviewed journal article appearing with an expensive publisher, badly typeset and without any proofreading done by anyone who can understand the language you're writing in. So let's not name names, but Taylor and Francis, for example. You think of one open access meaningful piece you can do, whether it's on your own blog, whether it's with a publisher that is, I'm not a predatory publisher, but I'm talking about a publisher where a local society, somewhere where people can read it outside of those global platforms that are charging people massive amount of money, university libraries. So, and likewise, and a second point, for every time you do a perhaps slightly banal, and I do them too, piece of social media content of cool find, exciting new discovery, new publication out, ask an uncomfortable question, challenge a cozy idea, even if you don't know the answer or you don't know really what you're doing, just push yourself a little bit to because I bet other people are asking those questions too about your field. and I suppose stay true to what you feel you want to do with your studies. Try and have some integrity with what you're trying to do, and make sure that you may not do it right, you may make a mistake, but you can always fall back and sort of reflect on any errors you make. That's my thoughts in terms of teaching and research, but I was thinking particularly online stuff.
Yeah, I'd say I'm on a similar line here. So first of all, bridging the gap between public history and academic history. It's also very important for me and part of what I do with my YouTube channel and more recently with my Substack. And the second point I want to raise is that of gatekeeping, because in my personal case, I am, by a very unfortunate mix of circumstances, let's say a semi-independent researcher. I do have a contract with a small university in the States, but still my title is preceptor, which is something I don't really appreciate. There is a lot of gatekeeping in the sense that, okay, if you're a semi-independent or non-affiliated researcher, then you need to be bad at what you do because you're not in the system. I think we need to let go of that assumption, because I think we are, at least here, we are aware of the problems the academic system is facing, and we are aware of the fact that there aren't just enough jobs for everyone in particular areas of studies. So, for example, I come from Eastern Europe, and very late in my scholarly career, I realized that I want to do Nordic studies. I don't want to do Roman history because everyone was doing Roman history, so I switched specialties. And that backfired, but at the same time, I don't regret it because I had the chance to do something very original, at least for the background I come from. So even as an independent scholar, I discovered in the past few years that there is a lot of things that still can be done, and not only with public engagement, but also in academia. So people shouldn't be discouraged to send their papers to journals, because some very serious journals do publish independent researchers as well. And a lot of conferences do accept good papers if they're well fundamented and with good arguments. They do accept them. So there is a lot to be done also on the fringes of academia, and we should let go of this assumption that you really need to be rooted in the system in order to contribute to scholarly debates.
I mean, I can continue in that very, very nicely. I mean, I am here as someone who deals with humanities, but I will also say, let's do this kind of grassroots things. So if mainstream academia does not accept us in some ways, we can find our own way to be accepted by doing what we like. So that's why, and without advertising, that's why we started with a colleague, Isigoria Publishing, trying to make people publish their work a bit more openly, without constraints, without money, because what Howard said earlier, I mean, it is crazy. The academic publishing is out of this universe. I mean, the prices, the ideas, the quality. Don't even start to discussing that. So, what can we do? I think that we should start on thinking in generally history. Okay, we need to think about the margins of what is the history that we have been teaching or we have been learning. If this means for classics, for example, which is our area, classics is a European construct. Of course, there are other civilizations across the Mediterranean basin, which should be classical, okay? And there are, of course, other civilizations in other parts of the world, which may be more classical than classics. As in China, as in India, I mean, Mesopotamia, we name them. We don't learn about them, anything, okay? Be a bit uncomfortable with asking those questions, like Howard said, that you don't know where they lead, okay? Just on top of your head, say it loud, put some people think on it, your students mainly, colleagues, discuss something positive will come out for sure, 100%, because we're, I think, good in critical thinking. And the other thing is, like, having moved a bit around, I understand more than ever that history is universal in many ways. Okay, so what we have as cultural understanding should be world history, but at the same time, history is local. So classics, it's a local European, Greek and Roman history. Okay, there are other histories like that, and we need to communicate with them in this kind of locality, whatever that means. Okay, and I think that will get us through at least some of the obstacles. That is my 2 cents.
Just to pick up on that, I always describe classics as a small area study that got universalized, became much more important than it really ever should have been when you look at the whole diversity of the world through European colonialism. But I want to say something in answer to your question, slightly maybe more ideological, though I agree with absolutely everything that everyone suggested, especially the importance of non-hegemonic spaces or alternative spaces for thought. I think that's really important. I think that we should be wary. In fact, I think we should actively resist getting caught between the carrot and the stick. What I mean by that is when you deplete a subject of its resources, you make the scholars within that subject very manipulable, because all you have to do is offer them a small carrot and they suddenly will jump on ideologically to whatever that carrot is offering. Or you have to show them a small stick, or a big stick. In fact, you have to say to them, well, if you, let's say, campaign for the liberation of the Palestinians, ICE agents will show up at your door, and kidnap you or disappear you. There are big sticks too, but once the subject is under-resourced, people become much more manipulable. And I think that's very important. I want to reflect back on the way that China has figured in this conversation, through what I'm saying about the carrot and the stick, because I think we should be suspicious of state narratives of history. And that also means being suspicious of states that start to invest hugely in history. And that's what I mean by the carrot, right? You might think as historians, we would say, oh, look, a state is investing suddenly in ancient history. How great for all of us. I think we have to be wary of that, because if you ask the question, why is China in this current moment, really, really obsessed with ancient history? One answer, very, very tragically, is the genocide of the Uyghur Muslims, right? One answer is because China is rewriting history to write out the Uyghur Muslims. They're not the only group that are being written out of Chinese state history, but the Uyghur Muslims, particularly, who are being written about, the history is being rewritten so that they're a kind of late coming invader to East Turkestan, which has been their land for an extremely long time. So I think we have to be, I'm just using that as an example, because I think that we have to be very wary of the way that states, and especially ethno-nationalist states, are invested in history. So we need to be aware of the precarious situation we're in, but we should never be so aware of the precarious situation that we could be taken in by the idea that state investment in history is always a good thing. I think we have to stay really suspicious, as everyone's been saying, it's a kind of obvious point. We have to stay very suspicious of state investments in history and state narratives. In fact, grand narratives of history in general, we should be suspicious of. And we are in this moment of huge repression of academic freedom. And for as long as we have that voice, we need to use it, and we need to use it in support of each other, because if we anticipate losing it and don't use it for that reason, we've already lost it. So we've got to use the voice that we've got, and we've got to be suspicious of the way that we are being controlled as our resources are being taken away.
Thank you all so much for this wonderful discussion. I think that's a lovely note to end on. You cannot appease the people who are going to take this away from you. It's just not possible. It's not even just a moral imperative. It's also a matter of they will never be satisfied until they control it all. So on that note, I would like to thank all of our wonderful panelists. This has been a really engaging discussion. I wish we could continue it longer. I'd like to thank our lovely audience and the chat, which has been asking some great questions I wish we'd had time for. They've been a little bit off topic, so I haven't posted them, but people are very interested in everybody's field of study, and especially in Mariam talking about the way of engaging young people in the community. and in the sort of cross-disciplinary stuff. So I'd love to see that in a future topic. And hey, I'm just going to make this pitch here at the end of this topic for Save Ancient Studies Alliance, which is trying to create a non-boundaried space, an open space for discussions like this. If you possibly can, we'd love to have your support. You can support us at our website. Just follow the QR code on screen. Please donate. During the birthday bash, any donations over $5 will get you access to our donor appreciation events. And more importantly, your donations will help us continue to have discussions like this, which are critically important, not just to us in academia, those of us who even are, but also to all of you in bringing history into a future that all of us get to share. Thank you so much.